Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlights series. Today we focus our attention on CG 3.5. In this benchmark, we explain the amendment process outlined in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. In Part 1, students will recognize the methods used to propose and ratify amendments to the U.S. Constitution and will identify the correct sequence of each amendment process. Our benchmark clarifications include Benchmark Clarification 1, recognizing the methods used to propose and ratify amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and Benchmark Clarification 2, focusing on the correct sequence of each amendment process. What are these methods and what is the correct sequence? We'll be focusing our attention on this information graphic. This information graphic includes the two different proposal processes and the two different ratification processes that are outlined in the United States Constitution. And our discussion will be focusing on what's included in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, as well as what's not included in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which is important because there are many people who have beliefs or opinions about what's included in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, but they haven't read it as carefully as you and I will throughout this presentation. So Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution first requires that to amend the U.S. Constitution, there must be a proposal. Now, a proposal can come from two different places. One place is from the U.S. Congress. 2/3 of the members of the U.S. House and of the U.S. Senate together can propose an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Another approach to proposing the U.S. Constitution is for there to be state conventions. And if there's a convention called by 2/3 of the states, then that convention can propose an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So this tells us two things that are really very important. One is that there's more than one method for proposing an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But second, more than a majority, right? 2/3 of the House and Senate of the U.S. Congress or 2/3 of a convention called by the states also must be one of the options as well. So both the states and the federal government have the power to propose amendments to the Constitution. Now we look at ratification of the U.S. Constitution. In order for an amendment to take effect, that amendment must be ratified. And interestingly, as you can see from the two maps at the bottom of the information graphic, the federal government plays no role in ratifying the U.S. Constitution. 3/4 of the state legislatures can vote to ratify the Constitution, in which case ratify an amendment to the Constitution, in which case the amendment takes effect. Or 3/4 of conventions formed by state legislatures, if they vote to approve an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, then the amendment will take effect. So what this tells us is that only the states, either by the legislatures or by conventions called by the legislatures, have the power to amend the U.S. Constitution. Let's talk a little bit about why. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation, to amend the Articles of Confederation, which was the Constitution for the United States from 1781 to 1788, that amendment process required unanimous approval by the states under the Articles of Confederation. So this reduces that unanimous requirement to 3/4. But also recall that to ratify the U.S. Constitution, it was the state legislatures who in essence had to give up power that they had under the Articles of Confederation to then change from a confederal government to a federal government. So it makes good sense to give to the states alone the power to amend the Constitution, because they were giving up this power by ratifying the U.S. Constitution in the first place. This is power that they had under the Articles, unanimous requirement now down to 3/4, but still a power held at the state level. The last time that the U.S. Constitution was amended, was in 1992. So it's been a good long time. And the last time before that was in 1971. So it's very rare that the Constitution is amended. In fact, there have been over 11,000 proposals to amend the Constitution since the Constitution was first ratified, and of those 11,000 proposals, only 27 times has the Constitution actually been amended. A well-known amendment that failed is the Equal Rights Amendment. There have been a lot of good books and a lot of good movies written about the Equal Rights Amendment that didn't get added to the Constitution, but there was a lot of social movements surrounding the Equal Rights Amendment. And it turns out that there were 3 states short to ratify. So the amendment was proposed by Congress, but it was not ratified by enough states. It was ratified by 35 states instead of the minimum 38 that were required. It's also important to note that only one amendment to the U.S. Constitution has ever been reversed, and that was the 18th Amendment was reversed by the 21st Amendment. The 18th Amendment was ratified to prohibit the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcohol, and that was in 1918, and then in 1933 that amendment was reversed. And so it's very rare, even though there's a lot of discussion about certain amendments to the Constitution being amended themselves, which would be an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, or adding certain amendments to the Constitution. This comes up a lot during presidential election years when presidential candidates will say that they support a certain amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this year is no different. We have candidates who are saying already, even though I am making this presentation to you several months before the next presidential election of 2024, have already been speaking about ways that they'd like to see the Constitution be amended, and this is a very common process. Why is that interesting to me? Is because, as you can see from the information graphic, the president gets no role. The president plays no role in the amendment process of the U.S. Constitution, and yet presidents campaign on changing the Constitution. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. If you still have questions, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.